A dream wedding, a luxury resort, a couple deeply in love, or so it seemed. But within days, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. A young bride, dead. Her husband, the prime suspect. What really happened inside that Goa resort? Authorities found her lifeless body in their suite. No signs of forced entry, no screams for help. Just silence, and one man with all the answers. But his story, it didn't add up. Was it an accident or a cold-blooded murder? Security footage, phone records, and forensic reports revealed chilling details. Was this a crime of passion, a premeditated plan, or something even more sinister? This case shook India because behind the romance was a dark secret that no one saw coming. And when the truth came out, it left everyone stunned. This is the shocking case of the newlywed bride murdered at a Goa resort. And tonight, we uncover the truth. Let me explain how it all unraveled. It started as the perfect honeymoon, a newlywed couple celebrating their love at a luxury resort in Goa. The warm sun, the sound of waves, and the promise of a beautiful future ahead. But just a few days later, that dream turned into a chilling crime scene. The bride, a young woman full of life, was found dead in their private suite. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and the only person with her that night, her husband. At first he played the role of a devastated spouse, claiming she died under mysterious circumstances. But when investigators started digging, the cracks in his story became impossible to ignore. The resort's CCTV footage captured the couple walking in together, but only one of them ever came out. Forensics revealed unsettling details, marks on her body, inconsistencies in his statements, and a timeline that didn't make sense. If this was an accident, why were there traces of something far more violent? And if he truly loved her, why was his behavior after her death so suspicious? Authorities had questions, but the biggest one was this. Was this a tragic case of unforeseen death, or was the entire marriage built on a lie, one that ended in murder? As the police unraveled the truth, they discovered something terrifying. This wasn't just a random crime. There were hidden motives, a carefully planned deception, and a dark side to this love story that no one saw coming. And when the real motive surfaced, it left everyone speechless. This case isn't just about a honeymoon gone wrong. It's about betrayal, manipulation, and a horrifying truth that was buried beneath a picture-perfect romance. So what really happened that night? What did the husband try to hide? And why did a young bride pay the ultimate price for trusting the man she married? Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the darker this story gets. She was young, beautiful, and full of life. He was charming, successful, and made her feel like she was living in a fairy tale. From the outside, their love story seemed like something out of a romance novel. Friends and family described them as the perfect couple, inseparable, deeply in love, and excited to start their new life together. Their wedding was nothing short of a dream, filled with laughter, joy, and the promise of forever. But sometimes, perfection is nothing more than an illusion. After the wedding, they jetted off to Goa for their honeymoon, a place known for its beaches, luxury resorts, and breathtaking sunsets. It was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful chapter, but behind closed doors, cracks were already forming. No one could have imagined that within days, this dream vacation would turn into a crime scene. What people didn't know was that there was a hidden side to their relationship, one that only became clear when it was too late. In the weeks leading up to their wedding, there were whispers of tension, arguments that were quickly brushed off, and moments where the groom's behavior seemed off. Close friends noticed small red flags, but they never imagined it would lead to something this horrifying. As investigators started piecing together the timeline, they found that things weren't as picture-perfect as they seemed. The husband, who initially appeared devastated by his Wife's sudden death had a past that raised serious questions. Financial troubles, controlling behavior, and a history of jealousy, all things that didn't quite fit the narrative of a grieving spouse. And then came the biggest red flag of all, his reaction after her death. Instead of mourning, he was cold. Instead of cooperating, he hesitated. Instead of seeking justice for his wife, he became defensive. The deeper detectives looked, the more they realized this wasn't a tragic accident. It was something far more sinister. The resort staff reported hearing arguments from their room. The bride's phone records revealed unsettling messages, texts that hinted at fear, at second thoughts, at a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. So, was this truly a love story? Or was it always leading to this moment? A moment where one life would end and another would walk away with a deadly secret. It was supposed to be another beautiful evening in Goa. The newlyweds had spent the day exploring the beaches, dining at a high-end restaurant, and sharing what seemed like tender moments. Hotel staff recalled seeing them return to their resort suite late at night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But behind that closed door, something far more chilling was about to unfold. At around 2:30 a.m., security cameras captured the husband leaving the room alone. He walked down the hallway, calm, composed, too composed for a man whose wife was about to be found dead just hours later. He stepped outside for a few minutes, glancing around before disappearing from the frame. What was he doing? Where was he going at this hour? By 6 a.m., resort staff received a frantic call. The husband claimed he had woken up to a nightmare. His wife was unresponsive, lying motionless on the floor. He said he had no idea what had happened, no idea how she ended up like that. But the scene inside the room told a different story. There were bruises, faint but undeniable. The bed sheets were crumpled as if there had been a struggle. A broken glass lay near the nightstand, and the air felt thick with something unspoken. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no indication of an outsider being involved. So how did a young, healthy woman suddenly end up lifeless on the floor? The husband's behavior raised even more suspicion. Instead of breaking down in tears, he was eerily detached. He made calls, not to family, not to emergency services, but to someone else. Someone whose identity investigators later found interesting. And when police arrived, his story kept changing. First, he claimed she had simply collapsed. Then he hinted that maybe she had fallen in the bathroom, but the injuries on her body didn't align with a simple fall. The bruises on her arms, the slight mark on her neck, they told a story he wasn't ready to admit. The autopsy report would later reveal something even more disturbing. The cause of death wasn't an accident, it was asphyxiation. Someone had cut off her air supply, and the only person in that room with her was her husband. At this point, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but one question remained. What exactly happened inside that room between the time they returned from dinner and the moment she took her last breath? What led to that final moment? And more importantly, was this a premeditated murder, or did something snap in him that night? As police started pressing him for answers, the husband's carefully crafted facade began to crumble. Lies were exposed, secrets unraveled, and soon investigators realized this wasn't just a crime of passion. This was something much darker. The moment police stepped into that resort suite, something felt off. The crime scene wasn't chaotic. There were no broken doors, no signs of a robbery, no forced entry. It was as if the crime had been committed with precision, leaving behind just enough to hint at a struggle, but not enough to immediately prove murder. And then there was the husband, his calm demeanor, his shifting statements, his hesitation when asked the simplest of questions. It didn't take long for investigators to realize that this case was going to be anything but straightforward. One of the first things police did was analyze CCTV footage from the resort. They traced the husband's movements from the moment they checked in to the final hours before his wife's death. The footage showed the couple returning to their suite late that night, but what stood out was what happened afterward. At 2:30 a.m., the husband was seen stepping out of the room alone. He lingered in the hallway for a moment, glancing around before disappearing from view. Then at 6 a.m. he made the call to the hotel reception, claiming he had just found his wife unconscious. That timeline alone raised questions. Why was he awake at 2:30 a.m.? Why did he leave the room? And most importantly, if his wife had suddenly collapsed, why did the injuries on her body suggest something far more sinister? When forensic experts examined the scene, more inconsistencies surfaced. The bruises on the victim's arms and neck suggested she had been restrained. The broken glass near the nightstand hinted at a struggle. And then there was the strangest discovery. The bedsheets, which had been slightly pulled off the mattress, as if someone had grabbed onto them in distress. Then came the autopsy report. It confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. This was no natural death. The official cause? Asphyxiation. The evidence pointed to someone cutting off her air supply, likely by strangulation. The report also noted that she had suffered minor internal injuries consistent with an assault. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a sudden medical emergency. This was homicide. With this new information, police brought the husband in for questioning. At first, he maintained his innocence. He insisted his wife had collapsed out of nowhere. But as detectives pressed him, his story started to shift. He suggested that maybe she had fallen in the bathroom. Then he speculated that perhaps she had an undiagnosed medical condition. The problem? None of his explanations aligned with the forensic evidence. And then investigators uncovered something even more damning: his phone records. Calls made in the early hours of the morning, before he even reported his wife's condition. But who was he calling, and why? That's when police found out. Just hours before his wife was pronounced dead, he had called another woman. Was this the motive? A hidden affair? A planned escape from a marriage he no longer wanted? Or was there something even deeper lurking beneath the surface? As investigators dug further, more secrets came to light. The seemingly perfect newlyweds weren't so perfect after all. There were reports of arguments, financial stress, and even hints of previous violent altercations. What started as a honeymoon had now become a homicide case. But there was one final twist. The evidence was piling up, but there was still no direct confession. Police needed a way to break him, and they had one final card to play. The question was, would he crack under pressure, or would he keep up the facade until the very end? The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a tragic accident or a crime of passion. There was something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface, something that had been carefully hidden until now. As the husband sat in the interrogation room, his confidence began to waver. The police had already uncovered his late night phone calls, his shifting stories, and the forensic evidence that contradicted his version of events. But they weren't done yet. Investigators had one more piece of the puzzle, something that would finally expose the truth. Forensic teams had recovered something crucial from the victim's body: traces of skin under her fingernails. A sign that she had fought back. When tested, the DNA was a match. The husband could no longer claim innocence. But what was his motive? Was this planned, or did something push him over the edge that night? Investigators began reconstructing the couple's relationship, and what they found shattered the illusion of a perfect honeymoon. Friends and family painted a picture of a troubled marriage from the start. Behind the expensive wedding photos and social media posts, there were whispered concerns, fights over money, controlling behavior, and a growing sense of isolation for the bride. Some even recalled seeing bruises on her arms in the weeks leading up to their honeymoon, brushed off as accidents. But the most chilling discovery was the husband's past. This wasn't the first time he had been accused of violence. A former girlfriend came forward, revealing a disturbing history of manipulation and emotional abuse. She had managed to escape before things escalated, but the warning signs had always been there. Only now, someone had paid the ultimate price. Then came the final blow. The husband's bank record showed something shocking. Just weeks before the honeymoon, he had taken out a massive life insurance policy on his wife. A policy that would pay out millions in the event of her sudden death. It was no longer just a case of domestic violence or a moment of rage. This was premeditated. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the husband finally broke. His confident facade crumbled as he admitted to the crime. He claimed it wasn't supposed to happen like this, that he had lost control after an argument. But the evidence suggested otherwise. This wasn't just about anger. It was about greed, deception, and a calculated plan that had gone horribly wrong. With his confession, the case was finally closed. But for those who knew the bride, there was no sense of closure, just the painful realization that she had trusted the wrong person, and it had cost her everything. And yet, even as justice was served, one haunting question remained. How many? More victims had ignored the warning signs, believing in love, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare. Just when everyone thought the case was open and shut, the trial revealed twists that no one saw coming. The husband's confession should have sealed his fate, but in a shocking turn, he suddenly recanted his statement, claiming he was coerced into admitting guilt. His defense team came prepared, arguing that the police had mishandled evidence, manipulated his words, and ignored alternative suspects. They painted him as a grieving husband, wrongfully accused, vilified by the media, and backed into a corner by aggressive interrogation tactics. The courtroom was packed, family, reporters, and the public, all eager to hear the truth. Prosecutors laid out their case with chilling precision. The inconsistencies in his alibi, the forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene, and most damning of all, the life insurance policy he had secretly taken out before the trip. The jury listened in silence as investigators played security footage of the couple's final hours together. Footage that contradicted his version of events. The defense scrambled to poke holes in the evidence, but every argument seemed weaker than the last. Then came a shocking revelation, one that no one expected. A witness emerged, a resort employee who had initially stayed silent out of fear, but now they were ready to speak. What they described sent shivers down the courtroom. They had overheard an intense argument between the couple just hours before. The bride was found dead. The husband had been furious, yelling something about ruining everything and not going through with the plan. It was the final nail in the coffin. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension unbearable. And then the verdict was read. Guilty. The husband's face remained emotionless as the judge handed down a life sentence. But for the victim's family, no punishment could ever bring their daughter back. As the courtroom emptied, one question lingered. How many more red flags had been ignored? How often do stories like this unfold behind closed doors, unnoticed until it's too late? The trial was over, but the warning remained. Sometimes love hides the darkest secrets of all. The trial was over, the sentence handed down, and justice, at least in the eyes of the court, had been served. But for the family of the victim, the pain never truly faded. A daughter lost, a life stolen, and dreams shattered in an instant. Her parents sat in the courtroom, holding back tears, knowing that no amount of prison time could bring her back. For them, the fight wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure her story wasn't forgotten. In the weeks after the verdict, the media moved on. The headlines shifted, and the world seemed to forget. But behind the scenes, Her family worked tirelessly to turn their grief into a warning. They started a campaign to raise awareness about domestic violence because, as they painfully realized, the warning signs had always been there. The possessiveness, the controlling behavior, the subtle threats disguised as love. They had dismissed them as normal relationship struggles, never imagining that the man who had vowed to love her could be capable of such horror. As more details emerged, the true extent of the husband's deception became even more disturbing. It turned out that this wasn't the first time he had displayed violent tendencies. Past relationships, hidden legal troubles, and financial motives. Pieces of the puzzle that had been overlooked until it was too late. The resort where the murder happened eventually became infamous, a grim reminder of a honeymoon that ended in bloodshed. Tourists whispered about the case, true crime enthusiasts dissected the evidence, and yet the only thing that truly mattered was lost, a life that should have been lived. But there was a lesson in this tragedy, one that couldn't be ignored. How many people are trapped in relationships that seem perfect on the surface but hide a much darker reality? How many victims silence their fears, convincing themselves that it's not that bad, until it is? If her story could save even one life, then her voice wouldn't be lost in vain. As we close this case, we leave you with a question. How well do you really know the person you love? Because sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers in the dark. They're the ones who say, "I love you,"